Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Aaron Cavley and I'm going to bring you another quick RPG review because I love the hobby so much that when I come across one that I think's interesting or impressed me in one way or another, I like to share it out there, especially if it's from a smaller creator, smaller designer, because I think it's good to support our independent content creators. Today I'm going to take a look at Tricube Tales by Richard Woolcock. One category of RPG that I've recently started looking into as I get older and my brain can hold less rules are what they call minimalist RPGs. Generally, they have fewer character stats, the character creation is very simple and straightforward, and they have very few mechanics. And because they have few mechanics, they tend to be more narrative in nature. And there are a bunch of these minimalist RPGs out there because really a lot of people can come up with a simple 1 or 2 page mechanics, roll a die, generate a character. There's a bunch of them out there, and a lot of them are pretty good. Uh, One of the things that impressed me about this game, about Tricube Tales, was when I first looked at it, it was it's okay, it's very simple, all right, I get it, it's you roll some dice, but it's able to cover a lot in those few rules, and it does a very good job of it. It's very streamlined, very intelligent how it does it. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, this is the PDF version of it. Richard Woolcock has recently put it out in phone version PDF, so it'll fit on your phone because it's a small game, perfect match, so on. We'll just scroll down through some of the pages here, and it's really a game like most minimalist games. You can fit the basic rules onto one page. Now it has 53 pages, but you'll see it's pretty, the font's pretty big, and there's a lot of white space. And just to give a system overview, because you can get this free as a PDF on DriveThruRPG, and the other things I'm going to show you, you can get free or very low price, and I suggest checking them out. I'll show you some of the other things that you can do. The system overview is it's a dice 6 pool, and it's 1 to 3 dice, and it basically, you pick an archetype, and if what you're doing fits that archetype, then you get, I guess what a lot of games would call advantage. You get to roll 3 dice, and if it's something like a normal difficulty, then you roll 2 dice, and if it's something outside of your wheelhouse or something that requires a specialist knowledge that your character doesn't have, then you'll only roll 1 die. But this Tricube Tales, it also incorporates a difficulty level, a target number based on difficulty. And I like this because a lot of games that are minimalist like this, they tend to, it's just you get a success on a 6 or a 5 or a 6, and everything is about adjusting the dice pool. But in this case, you actually can adjust the die pool and you can adjust the difficulty. And I find that to be I find that to be helpful to incorporate certain scenarios. Now I'll go over that here in a second. So when you choose the setting, and here's an example of play, we'll skip that. But making the character is very simple. You make a 1-line description, a perk, and a quirk. Okay, and each one is, you have an archetype, whether they're agile, brawny, or crafty. Right? Agile is, well, agile, everybody who plays role-playing games knows what agile means. You get to You get to roll advantage, you get to roll all 3 dice if the task that you're attempting to do is agile or ranged combat. Brawny if it requires strength or toughness or endurance or melee combat. And crafty is pretty much everything that requires wits, intelligence, charm, skill. Crafty is a pretty big umbrella because it like everything fits under that. There's a section that talks about using the crafty skill, the crafty ability in context, which is important because everything really needs to be in context. You know, so if you have someone who's who's crafty, say they're a mechanic, right? They're not going to get their full 3 dice advantage if they're asked to do like brain surgery, which would also be crafty, right? So some of that's just a matter of common sense and applying it within context of the character, which is part of the description. All right. Perks. You pick one perk, and what the perk does is it allows you to, in some cases, modify a roll if it applies to the situation, something that can be reasonably applied. There's not a lot of guidance per se because it's fairly straightforward. You know, if your character is like here it gives examples, charming. If you're trying to persuade someone, then you can apply the perk. And generally speaking, what the perk does is it allows you to reduce the difficulty of the roll after you make it. So if your difficulty is 5, which is the general difficulty, that means that at least one of those dice that you roll has to get a 5 or higher to succeed. You roll and say you get 2 4s, you failed, but you can use your perk if it applies, and you can spend a karma point to knock that down. Now, you don't have to always invoke karma to use your perk, as long as the perk is, what you're doing your perk for is something that somebody else could do using non-specialized abilities. The example in the front talks about using pyromancy to make a elemental kick the door down, but since it's really just still a 2d6 brawn roll, then you can say it's the elemental blowing it up, but the guy next to you can't summon an elemental. He could just kick the door down normally with his foot and get the same effect. So you really only have to invoke a perk using karma if it's something that a normal person or couldn't normally do in that situation, like flying. You know, you need to fly up a mountain or something. No one else can get up there unless they can fly. That's something that you would probably need to use a karma point for. And the quirks, work the opposite. There's something bad, there's something negative. The quirks are hindrances to you. When you use a quirk, when you invoke a quirk, or the GM could invoke a quirk, what the quirks do is they allow you to build your karma back up. So you say you're obnoxious, and you think, okay, I'm kind of low on karma, I could use some karma, or, you know, my guy's obnoxious, and it would be a good role-playing time to be obnoxious. Then you can use your quirk, and whenever you roll the quirk, you're basically rolling at 1 dice, at 1 die. So you have a higher chance of failing. But even if you fail, you get 1 karma back. Now, if you make your roll, then you get a resolve point back or a karma point back. So there's a in-game reason and method to use your quirks for your advantage. Karma and resolve, like I say, karma is, there is kind of the meta currency that you use to power your stunts. And there are 1 or 2 things that they can do with it. I'm not generally a big fan of meta currency in games. It's just preference. But karma is very limited in what it can do. So it's really You can really think of it more as, expending some extra effort to do your special trick or something. Resolve is a combined hit points or your mental strength, and as you gain and lose resolve, it could represent either one. When you start a game, you have 3 of each, and when you lose an encounter, when you fail in situations where it's called for, you might lose resolve points. When the resolve is gone, when you lose your last resolve point, then there comes where you add a condition. Now, depending on what happened, if you're getting attacked by a swarm of cannibalistic albino goblins, that probably means you're going to get eaten. Okay, if you are being in a haunted house trying to investigate something, then it probably means you flee screaming into the night. And if you lose all of them, and if you don't die, then you will gain a condition, some kind of phobia or something, and it'll act as it can act as a quirk. This is one of those situations where it's kind of up to the GMs and the GM and players to decide how long term that penalty is. Okay, gear. One of the things I generally don't like about a lot of narrative games is that the gear is a tool that goes in the background. It has no effect. Just as someone who has, studied, medieval warfare and has been a historical fencer for a long time, and I've had some firearms training and stuff when I was in the military. Your gear really does affect things, and most narrative games, you just kind of throw it in the background and you just work it through, or they say, well, it's what allows you to do something. Because Tricube Tales allows you not only to adjust the die pool, but also the difficulty level, the target number, it's not really too hard to bring it to the front and adjust a difficulty. So if, say, someone's attacking you and you do have good armor, then the GM might give you to avoid the attack when it's the monster's turn, might lower that difficulty number. Or if you're, an angry peasant and you're stabbing your pitchfork against some angry chaos knight, then that difficulty would shoot up to 6. And then you can kind of roll that up into the narrative as well. Because it has those 2 different options that you can use to adjust the process, it doesn't bother me quite as much. And I certainly understand the idea of making the gear narrative, because it is, it can be very distracting and time-consuming to get into very crunchy details of resource management and who's got what, and because there's no +1 for this or -3 for that in the narrative game. So I don't necessarily disagree with that idea, but occasionally, when there's, he's an armored knight and he's not, and the armor doesn't seem to play a part, I have to admit that does irritate me a little bit. But on to advancement. Because you can add more quirks and perks into it, there's actually opportunity to grow. And when you add more perks, you're not really overpowering your character at all. You're not really making them more powerful. Although I think you can actually increase your beginning karma. And yeah, there's right here, you can, every other advance, you can increase your karma and your health, although up to a maximum. So you can advance, but when you advance, it's not like you shoot way up, and that can be a problem with games that have very small value ranges that they're dealing with. You know, if you're using just like a die 6 or something and someone goes up +1 or +2, that's a big swing in possible results. But because the perks that you can add are not always being used, mechanically anyway, it allows for a smoother advance than some games with a minimalist idea. So it works really well. Here's the first example of an archetype. Okay, an agile cyborg gunslinger. So whenever he's doing something agile that fits within his character, he gets to use his 3 die 6. And agility is what is generally used for gunfire, which makes sense for he's a gunslinger. Now he has a perk, cybernetic arms. So if say he missed and he wanted to use a point of karma to change the difficulty level so he could get it, then it would be easy to say, oh, well, his cybernetic arms, maybe they're linked, maybe they're, they become rock steady. But something like that, I would even allow, if he wanted to make a strength roll, I might allow him to invoke that perk to reduce the difficulty level if it was something, like punching through a door or something like that. That would normally be a brawn, but he could use, I would allow a player to use that. Okay, and these are just the basic characters that they show, and it's very simple. You come up with your archetype and a short sentence of what they are. And I love that kind of character creation because it's just a simple concept. He's got one stat, you do a perk and a quirk, and you're done. And within that small amount of framework, you can actually get a lot of stuff done. So you make the character, you pick the description, and everything, like I described before, applies and modifies the roles. I would say that you could even almost drop the archetype and get rid of agile and just use the concept. It'd be anything that a starship pilot should be really good at versus anything that a starship pilot would be okay at, which would be the 2 die 6, and anything that'd be outside the wheelhouse, anything that they would require specialist knowledge that they wouldn't have. So you can use that also to guide whether or not they should get the full 3 dice or 2 dice or whatever. But keeping it within those 3 archetypes, one, it's how everything in the game is built around. But it does also provide some guidance going on. Like I said, all of the conflicts all of the tests are basically it's a challenge, and you roll a 4 through 6 based on the difficulty number. And like a normal fight would be 5. Something that would be a normal challenge would be 5 or 6. And if it's something in your archetype, you get your 3 dice. If not, you get less dice. It adds an exceptional success if you get 2 or 3 successes, dice that surpass that target number. And if you get all 1s, then it's a critical failure, and you get to come up with something bad that happens. Now there's no tables or anything to kind of guide, but most people, you say, just tell them to describe how it really, happened very well. And of course, a lot of what we'll be doing is combat, because that's what we like to do. Now I ran a successful, it was a one-shot, but we did a Victorian horror, a Lovecraftian horror, and the system was able to let the paranormal investigator go and question people and find out where to go chase down the big bad guy. And like any good Lovecraftian horror, the character survived barely by running away. He set the he set the house on fire and ran away. Um, and that's, that's a good outcome. By barely surviving, he had one karma left, one resolve left, and so it was able to, or the scenario had a good amount of tension, even though it had, very streamlined rules. When you run out of resolve, the game describes death really as a narrative choice, which I think is good. On one hand, it does kind of take away some of the stress if it's not obvious, and it describes, the book describes, there's a lot of good advice in the book about how to run a narrative game like this, and how to run this game in particular. And one of the points that it talks about is making sure that the players know that they may be facing death, in which case that does crank up the tension. And what I was talking about before with the afflictions, you get defeated, something happens to you, and there's rules for recovering and doing the different challenges. And then NPC confrontations, you're basically it's player facing, so they roll to see if they hit, and then they roll to see if they can evade any kind of counterattack or whatever that the opponent describes. I like player facing. I don't think it's the great thing that a lot of people do, because I know my players and myself kind of like the GM rolling. So you can craft the GM roll to an 18 or whatever, so that has its own tension. But this uses player facing, and it works pretty well. The GM has, while the characters have their karma and their resolve, the GM has what they call effort tokens, which are basically, you add them to make the situation tougher or the bad guys tougher. You add that effort token, so they have to gain more successes. Normally, and here's this example of combat right here. It talks about 4 goblin archers. The elf shoots because he can shoot first. He's got a bow. The dwarf, he can't shoot, but he draws his warhammer and gets ready to charge. So the elf and the dwarf, the players decide what they do. The GM tells them to avoid the attacks. They make their rolls and they describe how they avoid the attacks, and then they carry on. He smashes their skull. The elf shoots the last one. So normally it's if you succeed, you're trying to kill the goblin. You succeed, you hit them. Okay, 1 goblin's down. Now you can adjust the difficulty of a group of enemies. So like in goblins, you could make one foe, like you could turn it into like a goblin horde, and give it more effort tokens, so that you actually have to get a bigger number of successes to mow down the horde. And from a killing the mooks, the henchmen, the thugs kind of thing, I like that pretty well. So you don't have to really keep track of a bunch of different hit points or tokens. It's just there's one group, and as you work your way through their effort tokens, you describe how you're knocking them down like bowling pins and those kind of things. And as you have bosses and stronger bad guys, then each one of those, will have effort tokens to beat them. Okay, and here's where it's talking about the context being important for the use of, especially for craft. One thing I forgot to mention, there's an option in character creation. So if you want to have, like it discusses, a thief who wants to use melee weapons, you could either describe that he uses melee weapons that are, like say maybe he uses daggers or rapier, that you could reasonably described as being agile instead of the normal brawn, or you could describe that he has a brawny fighting style, but then it has to be consistent. So if he's using that brawny fighting style, then he might not get his full agile dice when he's fighting in a more agile style, because his style is brawny. For me, I just would keep things the same. If you have a gunslinger who's agile, or say a gunslinger who's brawny, being able to shoot 2 dice and using your perks, that's enough to ramp it up. And because the goal is not just to make sure that your guy has min-maxed and has can make all the stuff. But anyway, that's really the gist of it. You can look at the skills on one page. Now here's something that at the towards the back, it has rules for the different genres. Okay, cybernetics, fear and insanity, hack and slash. This is like more of your dungeon crawl thing, and here it talks about giving ranks and things to the monsters and to the characters to simulate, like, I guess, OSR levels or whatnot. I'm not overly concerned about OSR levels per se, but if that's how you like to run it, then it describes that option. Myself, I would probably treat the rank here as just the number of effort points. But it's a good guide, because this is about the only bestiary you get, because it is it's supposed to be narrative. One thing that I like doing in the narrative system is you describe the monster and then you give them tags. In this example, the brawny and crafty and those things, those are what they are good at. So if they use some kind of skill against you, then you would adjust the difficulty. So a goblin, he's agile, so he's harder to hit with a bow, but he's weak, so he's easier to hit with a sword, because he can't melee fight as well because he's weak. But there's a lot of stuff you can do. I like to add the different tags and stuff, because they also work as descriptors, thorny tentacles or poison tail, stuff like that you can throw in and decide. It kind of helps the narrative of what they're doing. But that's not discussed here, but it's something you can easily do. And the magic and psionics, these are just powers. And these are genre limitations or discussions. So if you wanted to change magic to match a certain genre, here's magic limitations, spell lists, how to do that, and how to use mounts and minions. So all those things are pretty cool, because they're simple, but they give a good discussion on what to do. This part here I like as well, because you can make the vehicles, but you make them kind of like characters. All right, and so if you're driving your bike, now they don't have the archetype like agility, crafty, whatever. Although you could add something like that. I think that would be fine. So if you had a light battle mech, it would be agile instead of brawny, and so you could change the narrative that way. But it's very simple. You make this vehicle and use it in the narration. And so that's 59 pages on the PDF, and it's really such a straightforward, and it's a very tight system too, because it does everything. How to take care of everything is pretty well documented. However, that's not even the best part of the whole system, because the system itself is simple. Like I said, there's a lot of good minimalist systems that can do the same thing. But Mr. Woolcock has made a bunch of stuff available free or very low price. and they're basically their setting pages, right? And they're simple. Each one here, basically goes over the one-page rules for everything, and then it just comes up with random. There's a random table on the detectives investigate, and it's here and what they're dealing with. It gives what they're looking at, where it's at, and what they're dealing with. And the second page is an example of what all those things would look like. And then it uses an idea of adding twists to the story. So if you're rolling anything as the story comes up as an appropriate time, you take the 2d6 and see if there's a twist that comes up. And you just take these, it's a D66 or a D66, and you roll it, and you just take some inspiration from whatever the icon is. Here's another one for Interstellar Troopers. Again, gives you the rules, each of them gives like a quick narrative of the setting, tells you how to use your karma and resolve, and gives you an idea of how to play the game, and then gives you objectives, destinations, complications. All right, Pirates of the Bone Blade. This one adds a curse, so you can see what kind of curse you guys have. And there's a bunch of these. There's a bunch of these settings out there, and they're free. They're free, or they're 50 cents, or pay what you want. And you can actually get some of the products come with a template, an SLA template, so you can make your own. Now, I will say that for all of the other things I like about it, this solo rule set, the solo rule game, this one does cost a couple bucks, and it's well worth it. I have several games that I use that have different oracles and deck of cards and things like that I use a lot and like. But this Tricube Tales solo rules, it packs a lot in these 10 pages. Okay, it has your, it tells you how to roll your oracles, your yes, no. Here's some complex questions and what it could be related to. And here's a good discussion of story structure for making a solo game. And you can use these for solo or for, as inspiration for an actual campaign. Scene challenges, advancing plots, changing the scene, and just good discussions of those things. He offers a, because I think that might have been what it was. Woolcock made decks for Savage Worlds, but he offers a deck that comes with this. You can get the cards from DriveThruRPG, and I will of course leave everything down in the notes. And these cards, you can use just like a regular deck of cards. So it uses cards to come up with ways to give you what kind of challenge the scene is going to use, and what kind and how difficult. And then after that, it's a lot of tables, and like I said, they're packed, pretty dense. You have settlements, urban stuff, wilderness stuff. Right, you've got who you meet, the events, features, stuff that you can. I mean, it's just full. It's just a lot of good stuff. Dungeons, voyages, and very excellently the social interaction, because especially if you're doing a solo, if you're using the solo, it's you want to do what you can so you feel less like you're talking to yourself the whole time, which of course is what you are actually doing, but you have a table so you can decide what you want to talk to yourself about. There's some names and items And the items are actually pretty cool because you treat them more like artifacts. Some of them you can make simple things, but this is more for making interesting, important artifacts, not your +1 straight razor of shaving. And personal stuff. All right, things about them, and each there's a twist table below for each of the genres that are the main genres: fantasy, horror, and sci-fi. And there's just a lot of stuff. Here's one of the things that you can get are this cards. They're form fillable PDF cards, so you can change. You can mark, keep track of how many afflictions you have, or you can just print them out like this as well. Obviously, you can select what your archetype is, and you can use the and it has a Scribus template. That's a SLA file. I don't think I said it was for Scribus. And you can use it to make these cards. You can use it to make those one-sheet adventures. And it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of good stuff, pretty much free. That he includes in that. And I think a lot of that comes with the solo play. But there's science fiction cards, there's modern cards, there's fantasy cards, and there all sorts of different types of races, elves, and everything else. So a lot of good inspiration there. Anyway, that was a little bit longer than I meant to, but I really like these. I really like this Tricube Tales. It's quickly become something that I'm really inspired by. How simple it is, and how what a good system it is for how simple it is. And that just the solo thing by itself, it is so dense and easy to carry around. I'll be using that for a lot of my games because I like having those solo charts. It's mostly just print and play, and I just made it into a pamphlet there. But anyway, I hope this was useful for you. The Tricube Tales by Richard Woolcock, and I will be putting all the links in the bottom. And I hope you enjoy the game. I certainly do. Happy gaming.